Good morning, everyone. I'm John Koelmel, Chair of the Joint Authority and Canal Board, and I'm pleased as always to convene this joint board session. With me this morning, our fellow trustees, Dennis Trainer, B. Gonzalez, and Mike Balboni. We expect Trustee Pacente to join us shortly. And excused from today's meeting and unable to join us are trustees Tracy McKibben and the judge Eugene Nicandri. As always, Justin Driscoll and his esteemed team, colleagues, and staff are with us as well for this meeting that's otherwise been duly noticed as required by open meetings law. And hence, I'm pleased to formally call the meeting to order. We've all been presented in advance with materials, including an agenda for today's proceedings. The only change in our agenda is to move what would have been an executive session from the beginning of our meeting to the end of the meeting to hopefully facilitate the better flow for the public session. So with that modification to the agenda as presented, I'd ask for a motion to adopt that amended agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Michael. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. B, thumbs up. Any opposed? Agenda has been adopted. Again, as is routine, we were polled in advance of the meeting for any conflicts relative to approvals that are otherwise scheduled and pending. I'll assume there are no further modifications required to any of that. Okay, we will cover our traditional materials in terms of Justin and Joe, Sarah, and Adam. Phil Toia will give us an update on a number of our critical development projects. So we'll have a committee report out from finance. So we'll do our best to maintain some pace, but otherwise a lot of good content to cover. So Justin, please kick us off.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, trustees, NYPA colleagues, members of the public. Great to be with you all today here, albeit virtually. Hopefully we'll be back together at our next meeting in July. I want to start off, as we always do, with our strategy. We continue to focus on our Vision 2030 strategic plan and executing that plan, while at the same time we're closely tracking, a rapidly changing industry that we're in to see whether there are areas that we should perhaps be potentially tweaking that strategy. And as we've said to you before, this is an exercise that goes on regularly here, and it's designed to ensure that we're taking advantage of the latest technologies and solutions for NYPA and for our customers. So as we pull up the scorecard where we like to start, a couple things I'd like to note here. You'll see that after two very strong years of performance in terms of our DART rate did go up to 1.77 in April. And in fact, we had 6 reportable incidents last month. So this was an eye-opener for us. It caused us to pause. Yesterday, we conducted an all-hands, sort of an emergency all-hands meeting with the entire staff to redouble our efforts around safety. And as you know, we have very high standards here. We have a stretch goal of above industry standards that we look to meet. We've almost always met it, but this is it was something that caused us to pause. As I said, it was unacceptable. And so you'll hear a little bit more from Brad Van Alken in the Chief Operating Officer's report. So more to come on that, but I wanted to flag that for you. Also, you'll see in the chart, our operational performance and our EBITDA were strong in 2022. The EBITDA primarily due to an increase in natural gas prices and some commodity market disruptions that took place. Also want to point out 2 other components of the scorecard, the natural gas and Reimagine. And I'm proud to say there that we showed strong performance in those 2 key public milestone sections. So on natural gas in April, we published a promising study conducted in collaboration with our environmental justice partners, the Peak Coalition. And this study indicated that NYPA's small clean power plants in New York City could begin the transition to low or zero carbon emission technologies ahead of our goal of decarbonization by 2035 and the state's goal of zero emissions by 2040. And on the Reimagine front, as you may have seen, Friday marked the start of our 2022 navigation season, the 198th season of the Canal, as Brian has reminded me. And we're also kicking off the next iteration of our free on the canals excursions that were so popular last year. So turning to the next slide, during the last Finance and Risk Committee meeting, we spoke about the future of energy markets and how we can ensure that NYPA continues to remain financially viable for the benefit of all New Yorkers. And we had a brief conversation at that meeting, and we said we'd come back to you in greater detail. So we want to spend a little bit more today on that topic, and that you'll see is kind of the theme of the officers' reports, and you'll see some cohesiveness across the reporting today on this topic. So. As you know, one item that is critical to our financial success and the success of New York in this clean energy transition is the role that hydropower, and particularly NYPA's hydropower, will play in that transition. So I wanted to spend some time today talking a little bit about the clean energy future, what that will look like, and how NYPA is both supporting that transition and maintaining its relevancy in that changing market. So to begin, if you look at this pie chart, let's compare today's energy mix to the CLCPA or Climate Act goals. Today, as I think we've talked to you before about, New York is only 27% renewable, with hydro being the biggest piece of that renewable generation mix. And so while some of the state goals are technology specific, such as the 6 gigawatts of behind the meter solar by 2025 and the 3 gigawatts of storage by 2030, coupled with 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, the heart of the Climate Act really is this transition to zero fossil generation by 2040. And so as we look at the chart here, you can see that the renewable section needs to expand significantly at the same time that the hydro and nuclear are going to be remaining flat. So we just looked at the types of generation that are currently in place. Now let's look at the total generation that'll be needed by 2040. So in this next chart, which is interesting, this includes projections from the New York Independent System Operator, the NYSO, and its Resource Outlook Study, which is going to be finalized in the coming months. And on the bars on the left side of the chart represent basically what we call installed capacity. That's really what's available. What's the total amount of generation that the system can produce on any given day? So the NYSO expects that we're going to almost need to triple the amount of generating capacity, meaning available generation by 2040, while at the same time eliminating the dependence on fossil generation. So as you can see from this chart, also hydro will be expected to stay consistent under the NYSO forecasts. And that's consistent with our own projections here at NYPA. And while hydro continues to be the foundation of New York's renewable generation, the growth will take place in other forms of renewables. So I want to highlight one other component of this chart, which is basically the section purple hashed called DEFR, or dispatchable emission-free resources. This is a placeholder for technologies that haven't yet reached commercial viability, such as some forms of renewable natural gas, green hydrogen, and some forms of energy storage. The main characteristic of this technology is that it needs to be dispatchable by the NYSO, meaning that the grid operator has to be able to call on it to generate power, regardless of weather and for longer periods of time. So that increase in demand in 2040 that will be met by this new mix of generation shown in this next chart. The first thing to note here is that in addition to having to transition to all of our current load to renewables, we also expect to see an increase in electricity demand due to electric vehicles and electric home heating and cooling, for example. And you can see that hydropower and nuclear again stay flat here. The drop in nuclear between 2019 and 2025 represents the closing of Indian Point. And one other thing I'd like to point out here is how much more diverse our projected 2040 mix will have to be. In the benchmark year of 2019, you can see that all of our power came from three sources: nuclear, natural gas, or hydropower. But in 2040, we expect to have substantial contributions from at least 8 different types of generation. And finally, I want to again point out that purple hash category we saw in the previous slide, the dispatchable emission-free resources, becomes a substantial part of the 2040 generation mix. And with those DEFRs, as I also mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty around just what that DEFR mix will actually turn out to be. But I also want to state that NYPA will be playing a critical role in these new technologies as they come online, working with our customers on innovative grid edge solutions that benefit them and our transition here in the state. So as we all know, those are projections. Those projections are just that, projections. But across those projections for 2040, we do see some common themes emerging. So first, the grid will be more diverse. The energy supply will be more diverse. We'll see a wide array of renewables coming online, along with new technologies to balance the intermittency of those renewable generation resources. It'll also be more distributed. Tomorrow's grid is going to look more like a spider web than a hub and spoke that we're used to seeing today. And customers and end users will increasingly become their own generators, both with on-site renewables and also controllable demand from their own building loads. Finally, it'll be more resilient. We're already seeing the effects of extreme weather on our system, and this weekend's heat wave was just one example of that. We expect that climate change will increase the frequency of these extreme events, and New York must build a more resilient grid to mitigate those changes. And some examples in this regard are more customer-sided generation and more on-site storage that can directly address those resiliency needs. So now turning to these next slides, let's take a look at those trends and discuss what NYPA will do in those areas. To support a more diverse grid, we're investing in our foundational hydropower, as we've discussed. We're also at the forefront of decarbonizing our peaker plants, announcing just last month an RFP to explore replacing many of our peakers with energy storage. We're also piloting new technologies such as green hydrogen and utility scale solar storage to help ease the transition to new technologies by lending our expertise in integrating into the big grid. And in line with a more distributed grid, we're partnering with our customers and leading by example at NYPA facilities to move forward toward this spider web of the future. And through our new NYPA ventures and in support of Governor Hochul's 2020 State of the State address, we're working to scope out virtual power plants at several Office of General Services sites. And finally, to support that more resilient system, we're investing in transmission and enhancing the flexibility of our hydro assets through investments such as our next-gen Niagara upgrade. And some of this work is already underway. For example, in the first 6 months of 2022, we've completed projects in support of the Climate Act and in this transition to a decarbonized New York. A few recent specific examples, and there are many more, of our work toward a more distributed grid include the recent completion of the largest rooftop solar array at SUNY Albany, the replacement of all streetlights in New Paltz with energy efficient LEDs, and finally, opening of Evolve charging stations at Stewart Shops in Latham and Clifton Park in the Capital District region. And there's more to come. We recently began construction on $72 million of energy efficiency upgrades to heating systems at NYCHA facilities in the Bronx and Staten Island. And we announced a partnership with the Port Authority to replace the lights at One World Trade Center. And we're working with our local community partner, Purchase College, to design and install a large-scale community solar project there that will benefit the surrounding community. So as you can see, NYPA's decisions and investments are in support of New York's decarbonized future and guided by our Vision 2030 mission. We believe this alignment with state goals will help ensure our viability, even in this uncertain future. And to close, I want to bring us back to the impetus for this presentation to build on last month's meeting and the discussion on the strategic value of hydropower in the future. As you know, hydropower is the only renewable that does not get an out-of-market subsidy in the energy markets. That means that other renewables, other renewables can bid into the market cheaper than we can, and more often than ever, we're not being selected by the markets and are forced to spill water, which we never like to do. We expect this trend to increase as more renewables come online, and we're also being asked to ramp up more up and down to balance the intermittency of renewables, accelerating wear and tear on our assets. Obviously, this is inconsistent with the fundamental role that hydropower must play in the grid of the future, and it's a potential threat to the sustainability of our business. Recognizing the value of hydropower, both to NYPA and the state, we are pursuing several initiatives to preserve the value of hydropower, advocating for market rule changes that recognize the benefit of dispatchable carbon-free resources like hydro. And through investments like at Next Gen Niagara, we're working to increase the flexibility of our large hydropower units so they can more easily ramp up and down to balance that intermittency of the renewables in wind and solar generation. So at NYPA and for the state, hydropower is foundational. We know the state cannot meet its Climate Act goals without our large-scale hydro, and we are actively working to ensure hydro is available for generations to come. I look forward to coming back to you in the future with updates on our successes in these efforts, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the energy system of tomorrow and how NYPA is already supporting that transition by focusing our resources and investments on the common themes across projections for the future. Through the other officers' reports today, you'll hear more from each business unit about how they are working to ensure NYPA remains strong as New York transitions to a decarbonized grid. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. A lot there, so let's spend a couple minutes chatting about it. Carly, if you could roll the tape back to the beginning so we can navigate our way through all of that. Bump it back to the scorecard, if you would. Fire away here a little bit, and everybody please feel free to jump in. The DART rate discussion. Well, it's a consistent and appropriate focus for us. Just to clarify, what are the operational ramifications of that variance? Was anything we're doing compromised as a result of that? I appreciate we are very focused on employee safety and welfare, and I'm not trying to diminish that, but in terms of the business and the operations, is there any impairment as a result of that 1 percentage point digression from target?
No, we have Brad Van Alken on as well, but no, there weren't any operational ramifications, but it did cause us to take note. Obviously, safety is fundamental here.
Understand.
And of utmost importance to us. Yep. So it's
an
the injuries were
aspirational objective, but our target set at a level well above anything that would impair business operations. This is kind of the repetitive discussion that we've had historically. I'm just trying to clarify, make sure. So it's aspirational because it's really important, but not at a level where it said operations are impacted or impaired, let alone customer delivery or service is compromised in any way because of the variance.
That's correct. I think the injuries could be characterized as minor injuries, but it was an uptick that caught our eye. And Brad, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That's also, as Justin said, these are not necessarily considered significant injuries. That's also a level 3 metric that we track. Significant injuries might be obviously, an amputation, broken bones, things like that. Whereas these injuries are a little more lesser than that, but they are an indicator that we need to kind of step up and take notice and then try to address it with our staff and our teams and put some plans in place to make sure that we never get to that point.
And I appreciate that. It's just on the scorecard when it's noted as significantly off target. The implication is that that's a problematic, red flag for us. And I'm just clarifying that's not the case in terms of the business and the operations and the customer service and delivery. I'm not challenging the aspirational objective. I'm just trying to ensure our failure to meet that aspirational objective isn't translating to operational performance. Okay, enough said, move on. Give me, refresh my memory some more, Justin, or expand a bit on the greenhouse gas savings and why we're so far in excess of target what was targeted versus expand on that, refresh my memory a bit more if you would, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it's and we have Sarah here as well, but I mean, it's basically project delivery and the completion of projects that resulted in capturing additional greenhouse gas emissions reduction savings. So I think obviously we're always looking to exceed our targets, but some of this can be timing as well in terms of the delivery of projects. So
and
I think
that's what I'm trying to understand. What were we able to do that was so accelerated from what was targeted, and why were we able to accomplish that? Obviously, it's very notable, very significant. I'm just trying to clarify the what and the why.
Yep, Chairman. Good morning, trustees. So in the end, when it comes to our energy efficiency projects, our evolve projects, they're quite lumpy. So from one month to the next, we could either be delayed or accelerated in terms of finishing a project that has a specific milestones or greenhouse gas emissions with it. So frequently we're trying our best to forecast over the course of the year when we're going to come in. But in the end, some of the projects that came in that had a higher impact on greenhouse gases came in faster than we anticipated. But you'll see when I stand up and share my results, there are other projects that we're delivering that are delayed. I mean, we forecast on a month-to-month basis, but if it slips, or accelerates by a week or two, then that has an impact ultimately what you see on the actuals versus the target.
So what are we forecasting for the year, Sarah? Will this extrapolate into outsized performance for the year, or is this literally a month-to-month timing issue?
I'll have to get back to you specifically on that in terms of the end of year forecast.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions on the scorecard before we jump ahead there? All right, if you could bump it, Carly, for me. Bump the next one. I mean, anyone jump in here as you want. So clarify for us, Justin. So as you said, this is a forecast and a projected solution to the problem / challenge / need that we're all working feverishly to address. So clarify for me, educate me in terms of the dispatchable emission-free resources. Your comments caused me this question: is the concern come 2040 whether or not what's being generated is dispatchable, or is the challenge the ability to generate power with the emerging technologies, or is it a combination of both? What's the primary concern? The dispatchability, if that's a word, or
I think
the actual emerging technologies?
So I think it is a combination of both. We've got as we move toward 2040 and the zero emission grid, there has to be additional technological work done in the area of storage, right? And that's probably, as we sit here today, it's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle that needs to grow. And so storage needs to be of longer duration. Right now, as we said in our study, most of the storage is 4-hour duration, and it's not sufficiently long in duration to be able to balance the absence of renewable generation. We're going to be much more dependent on wind and solar, with 9 gigawatts of offshore wind and a lot of onshore wind and solar. And, that has to be balanced. And right now, that balancing is done largely by natural gas plants. And so with the elimination of natural gas plants, there needs to be another piece of the puzzle that comes in to serve that purpose. And long duration battery storage is key. There are a lot of other forms of storage that are being studied, as well as other innovations, but that piece by 2040 is going to need to grow, and And so that's why that's sort of, there's a lot of uncertainty around that piece of the bar chart.
Well, so storage was another question I had. So to play off of that, at the risk of being ignorant, is storage an overlay in general here? Obviously, storage isn't identified as a component, because it's not a generation issue, but is storage an overlay issue across all of this time frame and time spectrum? And where are we in the storage game? And what needs to happen there to be responsive progressively in the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, well, so we're working with our customers on storage, and whether it takes different forms. We've got a lot of on-site solar and storage. We've been very successful in those sort of distributed on-site customer solutions that involve storage. We're also currently conducting a pilot 20 megawatt storage facility in the North Country, where we're working closely with utilities and other partners on that project. And so in our R&D and technology work, we continue to work with EPRI and others on new forms of storage. But to answer your question directly, I think that, as we are more dependent on intermittent resources, the role of storage will need to grow. But it's going to take everything, right? If you think about the work we did around Clean Path and this transition in New York City to take it away from its dependence on fossil generation, it's going to take, the 2 DC cables that'll be coming into New York City. That's like, I think, 2,500 megawatts in total. It's going to take the 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. It's going to take a lot of the customer and distributed resources and storage. It's going to take, in our hydro, as we've been discussing, key component of all that. It's going to take all of that. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I think I'm proud of where we are at NYPA in terms of the role we're playing as an innovator and working closely with, like I said, other utilities, and we work very closely with EPRI as well. And there's a lot of great work being done. Be happy to come back to you with a more targeted presentation on storage in the future if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, can I weigh in just a second here? It has always been my understanding that the only way that renewables work because of the intermittency of their generation is by having a sustainable and comprehensive storage plan. And so I applaud Justin for focusing on generation, and the diversification of the generation is a really great thing to have. Aside from this, though, I echo your comments, Mr. Chairman. I would love to see a comprehensive, longer-term plan as to how we're going to build out the storage to complement these intermittent generation sources, as it were. But the other comment I want to make is, sometimes we all get focused on just what we need to do in terms of getting to the goals and things like that. But, if you take a step back and you look at what that scorecard says, aside from the DART rate, and you take a look at all of the key metrics for this authority in an incredibly turbulent energy market worldwide, having just come out of the pandemic, I think that it is something of note that this is an authority that continues to provide safe, clean energy that is dependable for the entire state. Sometimes that gets lost in our myopia, my own myopia of looking just at the different goals. But I'm I'm thrilled, frankly, at the numbers that keep month to month, meeting to meeting, justify and provide this foundation of belief that this is the authority that continues to provide the state with this important backbone of energy.
Appreciate the comments and perspectives, and certainly echo and reinforce all of those, Michael. Always proud of what the team continues to deliver in the face of a myriad of all the more challenging or diverse challenges. So I agree completely. And yeah, that's where I was going in terms of storage. I think it would be helpful, Justin, to drill a little deeper, because coming back to what you have here, while I readily acknowledge the work that you and the team and we're doing, put in perspective what our role will be between now and 2040. how much can we be responsible for in leading and enabling and supporting this change versus what percentage of the 2040 bar chart needs to be delivered, outside the spectrum of what NYPA can perform. I mean, our hydro component, as you said, is projected to remain consistent. We're leaning into emerging technologies and the like, but the success is largely significantly dependent on the private sector, other entities, correct?
Yes, yeah, but I think we can do a lot, though. I think we can lead here. I think of it, as you were asking the question, maybe in three buckets. So on our hydro and transmission, the hydro, of course, has to remain effective and resilient and able to respond to balance these new resources coming on. As you know, we're working a lot on the build out of our transmission system with all the projects that are underway. Those projects are designed to deliver renewables from upstate to the load centers. And so that's another critical function. I also think of the work that we do on behalf of our customers as the grid becomes more decentralized. We'll have a lot of customer-sited generation, which will help them in terms of meeting their own energy needs, but also provide for a more resilient grid. And then the third component, I think, is just the R&D and innovation work that we do here at NYPA with EPRI and a lot of the great work we do on our own here down on the 8th floor. So I think that we can lead in those three areas. We can't do it alone, of course, but we're sort of, because we're a utility and part of the state and the state family with a public mission, I think we in many ways are sort of the tip of the spear for the state. And so I think we can really lead.
Which is exactly where I was trying to go with this is, I think we just need to continue to lean into that opportunity, ensure we're doing everything we can to enable and support bringing others to the table, which gets me to the hydro subsidy issue. What are the obstacles in terms of being successful in terms of that our subsidy efforts there? Educate me and us a bit more as to what's getting in the way of ensuring what we're delivering remains competitive and ensures success and remains foundational.
Yeah, it's incumbent upon us to be good advocates for, as I've said this morning, for the benefits that hydro provides to this new grid. We have been very forceful in our advocacy, but the Public Service Commission, this is a multifaceted energy transition that's taking place here, and this is one. It's an important part, but it's one maybe piece of the puzzle. And there's been a lot of obviously focus on new types of generation and resources, offshore wind, on-site wind and solar, and so forth. And so we have advocated for some support for the work that the role that hydro plays, and that continues. There's also, as I think I've mentioned to you before, as one of the outputs of the CES 2.0 order was a study that NYSERDA, NYPA, and DPS are currently in the midst of to identify, how hydro can be properly recognized and compensated for the role that it plays. We're firming up with our hydro. We're firming up all these renewables, and there are ancillary services in the market, and maybe there should be a firming payment to NYPA for the role that we play in firming up, renewables. But that's a decision for the Public Service Commission in the state. And like I said, we're one part of that discussion, but we're at the table and we continue to work hard in that advocacy, but it's a work in progress.
But what part, I'm trying to clarify, what part of our advocacy isn't resonating with the PSC? I mean, what's the point of contention? What's the point of debate that ensures hydro is competitive as opposed to not competitive? We're not suffering from what other sources being incrementally incentivized. help me what isn't resonating there,
Well,
or what I'm
I
missing.
think one thing is there's been a long history of NYPA, as the only real, along with nuclear, the only renewables, and having been very successful over the years economically. I think, there's a transition underway with the wind and solar coming online, bidding in at zero cost with subsidies. And that's a new paradigm, and that has to be balanced with the need to keep hydro economically viable. And so it's not that our advocacy is failing, it's just that it's a very complicated, I think, transition that's underway. And I think that we will get there in making the case. We've had a number of meetings, and I know that our arguments are being well received. And so I hope to come back to you at some point in the near future with good news on some form of market design information for your benefit, and to continue to have this discussion with you. But I think right as we sit here today, we've got work to do, but the arguments are being made, I think, effectively and are resonating. But like I said, there are a lot of other, competing issues at play.
Well, let's make some time to discuss the other competing issues, since it's tough to compete with zero cost. So, want to ensure, we don't lose, the collective we doesn't lose sight of the greater objective here. But at a minimum, need to better understand some of that. So if we can make sure we carve out some time going forward to further discuss and educate and inform, I'd appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yep, B, go right ahead.
So, Justin, where are the best practices around this particular issue across the country that we should be paying attention to, if any?
I think the one area geographically that's most like us is the Pacific Northwest, with all the big hydros there, and California to a limited extent, because they do have contracts and do use hydro to meet their energy demand. So I think primarily in the Pacific Northwest, we work closely with our LPPC colleagues from that part of the country. And there's obviously a lot of similarities, and I'd be happy to, again, come back to you with maybe a report on some of the innovative things that they may be doing there. But from our standpoint here, I think our advocacy has been, strong, and it's not like anybody said no. When in the CES 2.0 order, they didn't say no. They said, we hear you, but we need to have more information on that. Let's study what the impact on you really is.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Anyone have anything else for Justin? Okay. All right, Justin, we'll circle back to a couple follow-up items there. In terms of the subsidy issue, the storage issue, how we tie all of that together. But excellent overview, and appreciate that longer-term focus. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Joe was up on earlier, or as Brad was prepared to pinch hit.
Brad,
step in.
Thank you. I can kick it off, and I'll turn it over to Brad. I was actually on call for jury duty this week, so I was questionable in attendance, and asked Brad to step in with all of our rehearsals in preparation for the meeting. So since he's in the blocks already, I'd like to have our SVP of Operations Support Services and Chief Engineer Brad Van Hucken do the report today.
Okay. Brad, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
How was rehearsal?
So far, so good. We'll find out in a few minutes.
You're all primed and ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, let her rip.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, trustees, members of the public, and NYPA colleagues. I want to start today by speaking to NYPA's safety culture. As we had some discussion earlier in the meeting, safety has always been an important value here at NYPA, and it's firmly embedded in our Vision 2030. NYPA recently earned both the RP3 Diamond designation, which is the highest award for operational excellence, as well as the Safety Award of Excellence for Safe Operating Practices in 2021 from the American Public Power Association. In order to maintain our high standards for health and safety, we must always remain vigilant. As you saw when Justin presented the balanced scorecard, the year-to-date NYPA DART rate is red. It's at 1.77, which is off target from our goal of 0.78. Fortunately, as we discussed earlier, none of those incidents rose to the classification of a serious injury, but make no mistake, we take each of these DART incidents very seriously. Our health and safety team has done a deep dive and is depicted on the graph, and they've categorized the causes of the incidents, and the primary causal categories was soft tissue and muscular stress-related injuries. So taking all this data, we've tailored response plans and actions to the specific nature of these incidents. Yesterday, as Justin mentioned, we held a NYPA-wide all-hands safety stand-down. And this was, the goal of this was to speak to the recent incidents to all staff at NYPA and to drive home the point that safety is a priority, and regardless of your role or job title, safety is everybody's responsibility. And every NYPA employee has the ability to stop and or stand down a job, especially if they feel something is just not right. A questioning attitude always helps foster a good safety culture. Lastly, before I wrap up the slide, I know the focus has been on the NYPA DART rate. However, I do want to take the moment to commend the Canals on a year-to-date DART rate of 2.47, meeting their target of 3.25. And this actually, they've outperformed their previous performance of the last 5 years. So, you know, while we're never satisfied when it comes to safety, we are a learning organization, and we're happy to see the numbers that the Canal is trending in the right direction. Next slide, please.
So just to clarify, Brad, the DART rate of 1.77 is a function of what's captured on this slide, the 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11 injuries. So 1.77 is the percentage that reflects a total of 11 injuries over the course of the first 4 months.
Yes, sir, and that's based on the number of hours worked so far. So it's a calculation that takes into account number of hours worked, and then they calculate in these 11 incidents. Over time, you know, our goal is to get that number back down as we continue working throughout the rest of the year, and our efforts to you know, educate and build different work plans. The goal is to get that number back down and factor it in so that we're back to where we should be.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Next slide, please. So now switching gears here a bit, the question of how NYPA can be agile with respect to evolving market conditions has come up in some previous discussions, so I know it's a topic of interest. And as many of you are aware, NYPA received the ISO 55001 certification in asset management in 2019, becoming the first electric utility to do so in North America. We're actually in the process of pursuing the recertification this year, and we'll be going through a recertification audit next month. The topic of agility is a great opportunity to illustrate why we do this. Why at NYPA we put so much of an emphasis on developing an effective and responsible asset management system. As shown on the screen, our approach to asset management follows what we call a plan, do, check, act framework. Under the plan component of the cycle, we establish an asset management strategy and asset management objectives. And these are directly derived from our strategic priorities and the foundational pillars of Vision 2030. So our strategy for assets analyzes forecasted changes in the revenue, expenditures, demand and competition, customer load patterns, energy prices, emergence of new renewables, and a whole host of internal drivers and external factors. But the aim is to factor these drivers into strategies for our generation and transmission asset portfolio, with the ultimate goal of optimizing cost, performance, and risk. We've also developed regional plans that are in line with this as well, and it takes into account the nuances and differences within the individual regions. All of these plans drive our capital investment, operations, and maintenance planning. In the do phase of this cycle, we execute projects and daily activities all in line with the requirements and objectives outlined in the planning stage. We continuously review our performance, costs, and risks and identify when adjustments are needed. For example, observing changes to supply chains may cause us to reevaluate our spare strategy, as well as adjust project timelines depending upon things in the market. This effort corresponds to the check component. And lastly, we act and implement and identify adjustments and update our plans accordingly. Through this plan, do, check, act structure, our asset management system remains agile. So this hopefully will give some assurance that external drivers and strategic decisions aren't just discussions that we have at the board level or in an executive senior management levels, but it actually cascades itself all the way down into the activities that individuals perform on any given day. I just feel the key point around this slide is that we evaluate our strengths and exposures with respect to changing market conditions. And without question, I believe our asset management system is definitely a strength of the power authority. Next slide, please. And so lastly, continuing on the theme of agility, I wanted to highlight just a few of the many efforts NYPA is undertaking to ensure that we remain agile within an evolving energy landscape. On the left-hand side, to support our strategic priority in preserving hydropower, just a couple of our projects we're working on. The Long-Sault Dam Gate Hoist Automation Project is about to enter its design stage in June. This work will actually allow controls to be located at the Long-Sault Dam in Messina and will be operated directly from the power dam control room remotely. Ever since the plant was built, these have been manual controls. Having automated rather than manually operated controls not only allows us to respond to fluctuating market demand and adjust water levels almost instantaneously, it also it provides a considerable safety improvement from actually having to send people there, especially in the winter time. The next one, battery storage. The North Country Energy Storage Project at Willis Substation is approximately 80% complete. We know that large-scale battery storage is an important part of developing sustainable New York energy grid. And this project not only develops 20 megawatts of energy storage in the northern region, but also gives us the opportunity to develop organizational know-how and the capacity in this area of the energy market. And of course, NextGen Niagara, which everyone is familiar with. The modernization and digitization efforts taken under NextGen Niagara program absolutely help extend the operating life and improve the efficiencies of our largest hydropower plant. On the right-hand side of the slide, we have our efforts towards decarbonization of our gas plants. Justin spoke a little bit about the small clean power plant adaptation. And to this end, NYPA commissioned the Small Clean Power Plant Adaptation Study in consultation with a group of environmental justice and clean energy advocates called the Peak Coalition. The study was released in April. Our first action as a result of this study was to issue a request for proposal for battery storage solutions at several of our downstate facilities. Our plants are some of the cleanest in the region, and we see our CENI fleet as a key contributor in the transition plans to a cleaner energy in New York State. And lastly, the green hydrogen demonstration project at our Brentwood power plant in Long Island. NYPA launched the first of its kind green hydrogen demonstration project to investigate the potential of substituting renewable hydrogen to a portion of natural gas used to generate power at NYPA's Brentwood plant. Testing is currently ongoing. We do see positive effects, and we look forward to sharing more of the results to you with the board soon when the study is completed. So this basically slide just highlights some of the couple of efforts we have going on across our strategic priorities. And in practice, our drive to remain agile and responsive underscores all of our strategic priorities and foundational pillars, including the commitment to safety. Our asset management system plays a key role in fostering this agility, which is critical as NYPA looks to achieve its strategic objectives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have. End of report.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it. Well done, well delivered, and kudos for the continuing very positive results and outcomes. Any questions for Brad? Terrific. Sarah, on the commercial side, bring us some more good news.
I don't know. Based on the questions to date, hard to know. At the risk of speaking out of turn, I just wanted to address the question about the DART rate. Fundamentally, we have a number of values at NYPA, but safety, I would argue, is our first and foremost. And it's not about operations and financial impact. It's fundamentally about ensuring that the people that come into work every day go home, because we work in an incredibly dangerous industry. And so the safety, so while it didn't have an impact, as you noted, Chairman, on our operations, in the end, DART's a leading indicator. And so without the safety stand down that Joe and Brad and Justin recommended having, there is a risk, that we could have, more serious injuries. So as a leader of the organization, I just wanted to make that comment to everyone. In the end, it's about safety and health, and not fundamentally about, operational performance or financial performance. Okay, so let me get started. As Justin mentioned, right, we are still continuing to focus on our Vision 2030 strategy. Nothing's changed there when it comes fundamentally to preserving and enhancing our hydro. My focus as well on supporting the transition also off of fossil fuels, and then supporting the decarbonization of the state and our customers. That being said, those longer term objectives have not changed, but we are dealing with some headwinds currently, and wanted to share a little bit more detail around the energy markets and how that's impacting our near term and potentially medium term performance in terms of our generation portfolio. Interestingly enough, some of the strongest results that we've had in the course of this year were in January and February, before Ukraine was invaded. What ended up happening was there were colder than average temperatures, the coldest winter since COVID hit. During COVID, gas producers backed down, because at a certain point, we were seeing prices below 20 cents an MMBTU. Now what we see in the market today is $8 an MMBTU. And so really what we saw at the beginning of the year in the first quarter was a pure supply demand issue in terms of the gas being available to generate. That pushed the prices up, and that enabled us to capture those incremental revenues and the spark spread during the winter months. Then we had the Ukrainian invasion. What ended up happening there actually is less about pure market fundamentals and slightly more about irrationality that we typically associate with the financial markets, but we also started to see that in the commodity markets. In the end, the US is maxing and has been maxing the exports of LNG out of the country, as well as and Europe has been maxing the imports of LNG into Europe. And so the prices can't really change any more than they are. We can't expect that gas that's going from the US would increase. In the end, frequently when we see the reduction in prices in the US, it's because actually the max capacity, which is typically what we see coming out of the US, drops. And so that's where you see sometimes the reduction in gas prices as opposed to the elevation. We have seen producers obviously picking up, and we have seen a slight settling in the market, but ultimately on a day-to-day basis, we're seeing quite a bit of volatility. So what does that mean? And for us, well, we've been accelerating in order to reduce the volatility, our hedging. We've met our targets for 2022. We're looking at accelerating and meeting our minimum hedging targets for 2023, the prompt year, and also looking at some other options and puts potentially even tied to the NYMEX gas markets, but we're looking at hedge effectiveness around that. But ultimately looking at, again, reducing the volatility in the out years and taking advantage of some of the higher prices that we see in the energy markets. The exact results through about mid-April, you'll see we're well ahead of target. Again, a large portion of that was from January and February, but again, we anticipate going through to the end of the year with the expected value and with the existing forwards that we're seeing on a daily basis that we will be ahead of budget, and I'm sure that Adam will talk to that in more detail. Relative to economic development, again, during COVID, we didn't slow down. We continue to allocate power. We're continuing to look at ways to support the development of the economy and the livelihoods of New York residents. One of the areas in which we're looking to continue to support that, building on EdCap 1.0 and EdCap 2.0, which were the bill deferment for 6 months and then temporary power allocations to existing customers above what they currently receive, is actually supporting the deferral of the energy cost adjustment clause that typically would take place relative to our tariff rates. And so NYPA, again, in support of all of our customers, is looking at not increasing the prices, despite the fact that the formula would present us to do that. And I know that Keith will talk relative to the consent agenda in terms of some of the other excellent work we're doing in terms of economic support. In terms of trends impacting the customer business lines, there are headwinds and tailwinds. Again, it's quite a volatile time. We've talked at length on inflation. We see it in our pockets every single day. We've talked about the supply chain constraints. As it impacts my business lines, I look very closely at the EV charging implementation and ultimately our distributed energy resources, which is solar plus storage. If you've read in the news, there has been a case brought about solar tariff circumvention, basically solar panels being passed through other Asian countries to reduce the amount of tariffs on there. That actually has frozen many of the imports coming in, and 30% of the utility scale solar projects in the US have been canceled as a result of that. So again, NYPA is out in the market. We're looking at developing projects behind the meter in the Sini region and Manhattan and other very congested urban areas, which deal with even more complex technical upgrades. They're not out in the middle of the solar field. So we do see some challenges there. We do feel confident that we are going to meet our goals for this year. But when it comes to 2023 and onwards, we are seeing some concern around the pipeline that we have there. And we're meeting together to identify ways to triage and to support that. One of the ways we're looking at doing that is, again, working with procurement to identify ways to bring potentially more vendors into the pot. The reality is that unlike maybe when we go to buy steel for some of our other businesses, we can't go long solar panels. We're not going to go long batteries. That's really up to the developer. So then ultimately we have to manage the expectations of our customers in terms of the prices that they're going to get for purchase power agreements. And we're going to have to continue to push incredibly hard on the developers to honor the prices that they gave, because there is a risk that they will walk away because they will not want to lose money. On the positive side, we have the regulatory landscape. We see a fair amount of funds coming in the IIJA, specifically around electrification of the transport industry, large critical infrastructure like transmission. And so I'm hopeful in working with the Department of Transportation in New York that we will ultimately be able to support some of the work we're doing in the EV charging space and with the transit agencies, allocating monies to them to accelerate the reduction of greenhouse gases in the transport industry, which is the single largest emitter, 40% of New York State. The future of Build Back Better, we'll wait to see, but there are many clean energy incentives there as well. So we're working very closely with the chamber and with their DC office to ensure that NYPA is aligned and can be supporting of funds coming to the state. And another tailwind, and just to reinforce what Justin was saying earlier, incredibly, we've undertaken several interviews and deep customer analysis in the last couple of months. I look forward to coming and sharing some of those insights, but there's incredibly strong interest in solar. So while we're challenged in terms of the implementation of it, there's not any customer that is not interested in looking out their windows and seeing solar on their roofs or in available land. Additionally, we're hearing a lot from our customers that they're really at the beginning of the decarbonization journey, which again, in reinforcing what Justin said, is where NYPA can lead, because ultimately we're technical energy experts and advisors, and we are bringing to the market and developing products that are going to help our customers navigate that clean energy transition. The virtual power plants that Justin mentioned is one example. We're looking at integrated offering to bring together in a more comprehensive and portfolio way all of the technologies that we have to bring to our customers. And so again, we'll look forward to sharing more of that. Going back to your question about greenhouse gases, and it speaks also to the red dots you hear, a lot of this comes down to timing. Again, from 1 month to the next, if a large project that's say $40 million isn't complete as of March 30th and it shifts to April 15th, then we could be significantly outside of the target based on the actuals and year-to-date targets. But we do feel confident that we will meet the year-end targets when it comes to capital spend for our energy efficiency projects, as well as the signing of the customer contracts for the direct charging fast charger, direct current fast charging facilities. In terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, which you asked, our year-end target is about 23,000 metric tons reduction. As you saw in the scorecard, year to date, we're at about 4,500. Unlike, we don't like to typically have hockey sticks, but fundamentally a lot of our projects, because a lot of our customers want to close things out over closer to Q4, we do see a typical ramp up. So we won't overly exceed our year-end target. We look to be on target by the end of the year. And that is it. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Sarah, maybe go back, start over, just so we can navigate our way through here. The macro picture I got in terms of our hedge status, and again, everybody jump in here. Any changes that we've made contemplating to our hedging program in terms of where we find the market today versus what we otherwise anticipated? Does our hedging program as designed and the parameters and the targets we have, are they still optimal? They still make the most sense for us?
Yes, so I would say that it's multifaceted, but fundamentally, we're looking at a minimum hedge percentage. That's what's required by our hedging strategy that was approved by the ERMC. That doesn't mean that we can't accelerate or do more than the minimum. I will say that we do consistent analysis to determine the optimal. And in the end, since the largest portion of our portfolio tends to be hydro, that can be impacted by the actual hydro generation and the volumes, we do a Pareto, and we identified that we don't want to be overhedged. And so we haven't seen the need, at least to date, to do much more than the minimum going into the prompt year, because we don't want to be on the reverse side of our hedges. We are looking further out than the prompt year into the further years, where we have slightly lower, as you can see in the chart, lower minimum percentages.
Sure.
We are looking at some other types of hedges, not just pure physical swaps, but potentially some hedging on the gas price, recognizing the correlations, and we've done some analysis. So that's still underway. And as I mentioned, we have to look at hedge effectiveness to see if that we can complete that. But it is possible when we come back in July that we may have chosen to look at some additional instruments and potentially hedged more. But as I shared with you, we're looking at accelerating it as much as possible, recognizing the elevated gas prices at the moment to try to capture some of those elevated market prices.
Yeah, what's our crystal ball say in terms of gas prices? What are we now anticipating?
Well, I think, it's kind of leveled off, right? It was kind of even higher previously. We've seen the forwards level off to some degree. Again, on a day-to-day basis, there's volatility, but we have lower storage currently and going into the summer months. So we'll have to see. Right now, the storage inventories are 5 to 16% below prior years, and that can have an impact ultimately on fundamentals in terms of supply and demand in the moving into the winter. Again, when we talk to brokers and when we read and monitor the markets, a lot of counterparties and individuals and colleagues and peers in the industry see that this as being quite irrational relative to the actual supply demand fundamentals in the U.S.
Okay. And give me a little bit more, educate me some more on the solar front. What, again, is your expectation, our expectations? Demand is significant, supply chain constraints, the tariff challenges. How do we ultimately see that being reconciled and when?
The next one. It's like magic. It's like I clap my hands. So with the solar, as you see here, we are anticipating about 35 megawatts with the storage and the solar by the end of the year. These are projects that are currently in construction. Where we see the challenge with the distributed energy resources really 2023 and onwards. In some cases, we've signed, our customers have signed purchase power agreements, maybe last year, the year before, and when the developer's getting to a point where they've received all the permitting and are ready to get started, they're seeing the prices on their end having increased significantly, which is really pushing all their projects out of the money. So it's very hard, to manage that aspect of it. Typically, and we've been seeing year over year, cost declines, technology cost declines, and overall soft cost declines as well. But so developers are typically bidding with that in mind, that they're going to catch a lower price, even though they wouldn't necessarily have gone long on solar panels at that point. But what we're seeing is a complete inversion. And so the prices of everything, be it labor coming back from COVID or some of the other steel, et cetera, going up. So again, I feel that in 2023, it will be harder for us when we're looking at our 2025 and 2030 goals. We really are we're getting together as a team to identify ways to kind of mitigate that and to really increase the pipeline, recognizing that the hit rate or the viability, the standard viability of projects that we've seen that have come into the pipeline, and the hit rate has been pretty steady to date, but I think that will be reduced, and the only way that we will be able to address that is to work with our customers to manage expectations on prices that are going to come in. Try very hard to squeeze the developers as much as possible, have them not walk away from projects, and ultimately fill the pipeline so we have a more diversified and larger pipeline to build on.
Okay, that's all I was going to ask is, is there anything we can do to, otherwise support or enable, the optimal progress? But okay, and then just lastly on the e-mobility and where we are, fast chargers, and in particular in light of recent critiques of our program, I want to make sure you and we are addressing where we are and where we aren't. So can you just clarify what the scorecard reflects here?
Yeah, so you can see we're on track for our Evolve implementation of the DCFC fast chargers in terms of being at 22. Justin highlighted in his opening remarks also some of the more recent openings that we've had really on a monthly basis. There are new sites that are being opened, so we feel like we've picked up the pace and have stretched but reasonable expectations in terms of the numbers that are going to be at the end of the year. The one dot that's red is around the work that we're doing with our customers and the transit agencies in terms of contracts signed. So that's really about a future pipeline of work that we'll be doing with the likes of MTAs or other transit agencies there. Again, it's a timing issue. You can see last year we signed about 45 million in contracts, which included the MTA, which is a lot of work to be done. Here we have a couple of smaller transit agencies, and we're just waiting to complete the signature of those contracts, and we should be on track for the end of the year. Just a timing issue.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. So your year-end forecast, you're still suggesting or
Green, I'm
believing
still green.
will hit target. So, okay.
Yes, that is my goal.
Okay. Anyone have other questions for Sarah?
Just a quick, I know, Sarah, you're gonna get back to us on your survey of the customers of the authority, but generally speaking, in addition to their views on renewables, what is their perspective on business going forward? Did you get any insights in terms of what they think in terms of energy, their own energy usage and their businesses going forward?
So when it comes to our government customers, clearly they are wanting to be leading in terms of supporting the state in decarbonizing, and they're very interested. Our major customers are working with us across all of our technologies and products: energy efficiency, electrification of transport, DER advisory, now virtual power plants. So they're all very open to it, and we continue to provide opportunities for them to finance their projects as well. So we haven't seen a drop off in any of those areas in terms of our pipeline. In terms of our business customers, or those that are taking our hydropower, again, they're all supportive of us getting to the carbon neutral grid of 2040. They do ask questions about the cost to them as ongoing entities. And so we hear that, because fundamentally our hydro programs are about economic development and growth, and creating opportunities for job creation, retention, and capital investment. So that we do field a lot of questions from our business customers in particular about the costs of some of the policies in terms of how that will impact their bottom line.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Adam, our financial story, please.
Sure. Good morning, Chairman, trustees, NYPA staff, members of the public. Want to give a financial update where we are through end of April at $68 million net income, $32 million ahead of plan. Most of that is from increased margins from generation. This is mentioned earlier because of the higher prices. Some of that is offset because some of that money goes into the monetized funds for the benefit of our customers. Transmission revenues are ahead of plan as well through 4 months. Non-utility revenues are behind, but as was mentioned before, that may be a timing difference. And other things that off of the target is that we had a mark-to-market unrealized loss due to higher interest rates and its impact on our investment portfolio. But that's a non-cash item, and since we hold our securities to maturity, that will zero out by maturity. Let's go to the next slide on the forecast for the end of the year. As we've done in the past, we're providing a range here. Expected case right now is $100 million, which is going to be over $41 million above plan. And the same themes hold. Higher case, $145 million, depending on what happens with energy prices and other factors, which we'll get into. But the same things hold. Generation's higher because of higher energy prices, the value of our hedging. Interesting is that our, half of it was coming from our hydro plants and half of it, the margins coming from our other plants as well, because of, for example, the agreement we made with Flynn, with LIPA is turning out to be very well and to the favor, probably ahead of plan by $15 million. As I said before, our customer revenues and energy revenues are higher, but some of that is offset by the amounts we put in the monetized funds for their benefit. While we had targeted a budget of $7 million at the beginning of the year, that is forecast to be $38 million at the end of the year. So that's taking some of those excess revenues and providing it back to our customers. We've also put into this forecast an item you'll see in the consent agenda that Keith will talk about, which is to waive the increase for certain of our customers' annual adjustment, which will save them $7 million over the course of a year, to help them deal with other higher costs due to inflation, other pressing issues to support economic development. And due to the increase of some of our merchant revenues, we're also looking at other programs that we can come back to the trustees and talk about how we can further assist our customers as well. So we're evaluating several programs in that area. Transmission is also projected to be higher at $18 million. It may go higher than that depending on where we come out with our annual transmission revenue requirement. We're finalizing that, so we will have a definitive update for you in July on that, and that involves an increase, but also a true up for the prior billing cycle. So you will see the impact of both of those. And then in terms of other things going in the other direction, between higher interest rates and its impact on the investment portfolio, as I mentioned before, is just temporary, but we will see some impacts based on the stock market performance on our pension expense this year, as well as potentially some OPEB impact as well, based on the stock market performance. And we'll provide additional updates as those become clearer in the future. Any questions on the forecast? But overall, you know, it's all good signs in terms of being ahead of budget and ahead of target, and trying to make sure that we can continue to maintain and do what we can to lock in some of our revenues in the future to be able to solidify our financial plan over the next 4 years.
Yeah, no, obviously great to see a very, you know, positive and continuously so process or outcomes rather, Adam, and endorse and encourage us to actively and aggressively explore what we can do to further support our customers with the benefit of the favorable results we're achieving. So look forward to hearing more on that. Okay, the
Thank
captive.
you. And the next item, the next item we'll discuss in support of Vision 2030 and our goals to become more resilient and manage our risks better. If we go to the next slide. As you will recall, I mentioned in previous meetings that the legislature had passed the bill to allow NYPA to create its own subsidiary captive insurance company. The governor signed that into law on May 9th. So we will, in our consent agenda today, we have a contract to hire a captive manager for a 5-year term. That'll be Marsh. They're a leader in this area, and they have done this for other entities like ourselves, such as the MTA and the Port Authority. So we are going to, you know, benefit from that experience. And just for, you know, the benefit of briefing, if we go to the next slide, you know, the advantages of the captive, it will allow us to better insure our risks across the board. Namely, we'll have access to the terrorist risk insurance pool out of Washington, which is billions and billions of dollars to handle any kind of terrorist related event, including now cyber-related events have been included in the terrorist risk insurance pool for the federal government. It'll allow us to lower our costs of insurance. It'll allow us to access the reinsurance market in London and Lloyd's, and tailor insurance policies to suit our needs. You know, one example and things that we couldn't access today, areas for like our transmission assets, which are currently not insured, or as we mentioned in the past, you know, we were able to do stop loss insurance for our self-insured health plan, but that's on a claim by claim or case by case basis. And the costs of that have gone up significantly. There was no market available to us to do an aggregate stop loss on all of our health insurance, but we believe we can be able to tailor one under the captive to meet that need, so we can provide a stop loss insurance for health insurance. We can also look at, other things down the road, some for catastrophic events or those tail black swan events that are perhaps low probability, but would have a very, very high impact. Those would be available to us, which were not available today. So there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense for us. If we go to the next slide. And again, the things that we'll put in there initially will be our property and make sure that we are access that terrorist risk insurance pool as soon as practical. And then we'll continue to look at all the other areas of our risks as well to put into the captive. And as it gets built up over time, we'll be able to cover more and more, and also not only save on premiums, but also increase the dollar amount of coverage for a variety of different risks. But as you can see in phase 3, there are things that you couldn't get today that we would be looking at. For example, an unexpected drop in hydro flow. So if you had a 1 terawatt drop today, it's about $30 million loss in revenue. But if you look back over 100 years of our hydro data, there was 1 year in 100 years where we lost 5 terawatts of hydro. Well, that would be $150 million loss of revenue. So given that it's a 1 in 100 year event, but it's worth insuring so that we wouldn't have $150 million loss in 1 year. So that's something we think we would be able to try to get down the road. So lots of benefits, and we'll be coming back to you with further actions to set up the bylaws of the corporation, officers, and all the other things that are necessary once we get our captive manager on board. And we'll be coming back to you with more information on that. Any questions?
Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, Tony.
I just may have missed it, but the selection of the administrator, how was that? Was that an RFP, or how was that determined? I probably missed it the last time.
Yes, we issued an RFP, and there's a handful of firms that specialize in this area. So we got some good responses, but overall they were pretty much aligned in terms of cost, but we really went with the firm that we thought had the best relevant experience to our needs, and they were clearly ahead of the others. So that was the basis for the selection.
Thank you.
And yeah, we otherwise discussed the benefits of being able to form the captive at Finance Committee a couple 3 weeks ago, and pleased to see the opportunity that we have and the good work you and the team are doing, Adam. So look forward to being able to further engage and move the ball further down the field as you go here. So well done. Anyone else? Any questions for Adam? Okay. Thank you very much. Phil, you've always got a lot going, and that's certainly true today. So update us on the myriad of projects you and the team are navigating and pursuing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, trustees, NYPA management, staff, and guests. While I have presented in the past for the NYPA development team, I am pleased to present here today the first of our regular updates on the status of NYPA development projects. We are continuing to work on projects that are aligned with and support Vision 2030 and the state CLCPA goals. We are focused on the competitive transmission projects, large-scale renewable interconnections, and grid-scale energy storage. That these projects help NYPA become the leading transmission developer, owner, and operator for New York State, as well as help preserve the value of hydropower and pioneer the path to decarbonization. In this past year, we have identified several projects that meet these objectives. We are also staying current with technological advances, as well as remaining engaged in industry and regulatory changes so that we can identify opportunities for us to compete in these processes to help meet the state CLCPA goals and support Vision 2030. Next slide, please. I believe that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I think this will help identify several aspects of where we are focused. Not only are our assets, existing assets, well positioned to facilitate the integration of renewable energy throughout the state, this provides us with a competitive advantage based on our existing asset base, as well as the fact that we have experience in developing and operating transmission assets across the state. I will briefly give updates on these 5 projects that are currently in various stages of active construction, licensing, or development. First is SmartPath. We are in the process of rebuilding NYPA's first assets, the Moses Adirondack lines. That project is the purple lines that run from the St. Lawrence facility south to the Lowellville, New York area. Construction for these lines is on track with the latest segment completed ahead of schedule. The remaining segments are on schedule with project completion expected in 2023. SmartPath Connect is right now currently in the Article 7 process. We have completed all of the requirements for that. We're waiting for the Public Service Commission to issue that Article 7 permit so that we can proceed with construction. We're currently working on material and construction contracts for the project. The first portion, which was previously certified under the Article 7 for SmartPath, will start construction in July. Once the Article 7 is issued, we will commence construction on the remaining portion of that line. Central East Energy Connect. This is a project we're working on with LS Power New York. This was a competitive process through the New York ISO, which was awarded several years ago. Construction is on track with the latest segment underway right now, and it's on track for completion in 2023. Clean Path New York, I've presented on this before. This was a competitive process through NYSERDA's Tier 4 solicitation. We worked on that with Forward Power. Right now, in April, the Public Service Commission awarded the contract, authorized the contract that Forward Power has with NYSERDA. So right now we are working with the Forward Power team on preliminary engineering, line routing, and preparation for the Article 7 filing sometime later this year. And the last proposal out there is Propel New York Energy. That is a competitive solicitation with the New York ISO again, looking at southeastern New York. It's a public policy transmission needs solicitation looking at integrating offshore wind into the Long Island, New York City area. 6 of our 7 proposals have made it through the first viability and sufficiency phase with the New York ISO. We are working on this project with New York Transco. So right now the team is supporting any information requests from the New York ISO to help out with the evaluation phase, which we expect to be wrapped up, project to be awarded later this year, early 2024. Not only are these assets, as I indicated, well positioned throughout the state, I just want to point out that with the exception of Propel New York Energy, all of these assets are utilizing existing rights of way, rebuilding existing lines and upgrading existing lines. So it's really trying to get more out of the existing infrastructure to help get the renewable energy as well as unbottle some of our hydro assets that are located in the same areas as those wind resources. So again, trying to get more out of the existing system and using our existing asset base to help facilitate Vision 2030 and the CLCPA targets. I look forward to providing future updates at upcoming meetings, not only on the existing projects, but as well as looking at other opportunities that the team is working on. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions before turning it over to Girish Behal, Vice President of Project and Business Development, for a particular project request.
why don't we flip it to Girish, and if anyone has any questions on either one, you can cover that. Girish, you
Great.
want to
Thank you.
talk about the JDA with New York Transco for Propel?
Thank you, Chairman Koelmel. Good morning, Chairman Koelmel, trustees, public attendees, and NYPA staff. As Phil pointed out, we have been working with New York Transco for about a year and a half right now in terms of developing the Propel New York projects. As a part of that development, as Phil indicated, we submitted roughly 7 proposals to New York ISO, of which 6 have moved on to the next stage. As we continue to develop those projects, we are working on the joint development agreement with New York Transco. The JDA basically establishes project development responsibilities and how we are going to work together with New York Transco. It also addresses long-term operation and maintenance. And what we have also done is identified a number of post-selection amendments to address some of the issues that will come to the fore as the project agreement is executed with NYSA. As a result of all the work that we've done, we are requesting the authorization from the trustees to enter into the joint development agreement with Transco.
We've had discussions on all that Phil and his team are overseeing, as well as the Propel project, but any follow-up thoughts, comments, questions from any of the trustees for either Phil or Girish? Obviously, incredibly important, incredibly significant efforts and initiatives for us at this stage, and pleased and proud of the success we're having in creating the opportunities and helping lead the way. If not, we do need a motion to adopt the proposal that Girish presented for a joint development agreement with New York Transco. So could I ask for a motion to adopt that? Thank you, Dennis. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Michael. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Girish. Thank you, team. Kudos, continuing kudos for the good work being done, and look forward to further dialogue on the topics you presented and others we discussed as we continue to navigate the challenges and opportunities of an ever dynamic and more fluid environment. So well done, one and all. Our next item we had, as I said, just as I look, a month ago, a Finance and Risk Committee meeting chaired by Tracy McKibben. Out of that, there were half a dozen proposals, recommendations that the committee made for approval by us as a full board in Tracy's absence. I'll give you a quick recap of those items. The first of which is our Q3 funding and the release thereof of $21.3 million for the Canal Corporation and to support the operations thereof. The second item is a 6-year construction contract to Michael's Power, not to exceed a total amount of $276 million. This is in connection with the Smart Path Connect project that Phil just referenced. Next, we have a 10-year on-call equipment contract for engineering, design, testing, furnishing, and delivery of control enclosures and relay panels to Wunderlich Malik Services of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, not to exceed $36 million. And this supports a range of the authority system-wide needs at existing and new substations, inclusive of our Vision 2030 initiatives. The fourth item was IT related and the extension of existing personal service contracts with several firms supporting our IT efforts for a total of an additional 12 million, increasing that total contract to 67 million. And then the last two contracts were waivers relative to Article 22 steel components, providing otherwise for the purchase of, in whole or substantial part in the U.S. for the procurement of certain instruments and transformers, to award an on-call equipment contract to Hitachi Energy as well as to Trench Industries, and a second waiver to provide for the purchase of steel components produced in whole or in some part of the United States. This waiver was in connection with an equipment contract to Trench Industries. In spite of best efforts, those waivers are deemed relevant and appropriate. So apologize for my limited overview there, but hopefully it gives you a good drive-by of what we discussed and what was recommended by the Finance Committee. Unless anyone has any further thoughts or questions, I'd ask for a motion to approve all 6 items as recommended by the Finance and Risk Committee.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. There was definitely a first, second, a third, and a fourth in there. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next item is the consent agenda, which hopefully, everyone's had a chance to review. Before I ask for a motion to adopt, as I was reviewing the materials, clearly some notable awards are being recommended and made in the broad-based economic development arena. So I asked Justin, Sarah, to have Keith give us a bit of a drive-by. We haven't heard from him in a couple meetings, whether it be the GM project, which is certainly very significant to our region here in Western New York, or some of the others. Keith, if you could give us a bit of an overview of the great work you've been doing. Adam referenced the waiver for the benefit of our clients, et cetera. If you could just talk to all of that for us, if you would.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and good morning, trustees, public, and everyone in attendance today. I'll start with the waiver on annual compliance on behalf of our economic development customers. As we had done previously, we brought to the board a waiver to address the ongoing pandemic and the impacts that it continues to have on businesses. And one thing to note here is, even though there may be customers who are not meeting their job commitments on a programmatic basis, we exceed the number of jobs committed to programmatically. So that continues to be good news. And the same goes for the capital investment commitments. Businesses continue to struggle with supply chain issues, delays, high transportation costs, to name a few. And we feel this is the appropriate action to continue to support their efforts and keep them located in New York. In addition, as Sarah and Adam mentioned, there's an annual adjustment factor. It's tied to 3 indices, 2 from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 1 from the Energy Information Administration. There would typically be a somewhere between a 4.6 and 5% increase in the annual rates, and we are asking that the board consider waiving that for this year, July of 2022 through June of 2023, and then recommencing the annual adjustment factor next year. So that's the one item for customer assistance. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned some significant movement or awards with respect to economic development in Western New York. I'm pleased to bring to you a recommendation for 3.9 megawatts of replacement power to General Motors Components Holdings Company. The company produces automotive heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, as well as powertrain cooling components and systems, all for use in their GM vehicles. They are now looking to produce electric vehicle components at the Lockport facility. That facility has been there for 85 years. And the company is also a longtime NYPA customer, actually since 1961. So 62 years under contract with the New York Power Authority. Back then, not that anybody would remember, but the name of the company was General Motors Harrison Radiator Division. And that company actually was established in 1910. So long history here. This new project would support the transition from internal combustion engines to EVs. The company anticipates that the expansion would include the creation of several new programs supporting the manufacturing of those EV components. And the application has been considered under our Green Jobs Evaluation Incentive Plan that the trustees approved last year. Some notable things, the job commitments, base commitments of 1,249 existing jobs and at least 200 new high-paying jobs with average wages and benefits of about $98,850. And they are making a capital investment commitment of at least $137 million in this expansion, which is about a 250,000 square foot addition, a bigger facility for new machinery and equipment purposes. So that's kind of the summary of the award. I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Oh, thanks very much, Keith, and obviously can only reinforce the significance of the GM investment. It was great news when that was announced a while back in terms of their commitment to the area and the retrofit for electric vehicles going forward. So very exciting, and as always, proud that we're enabling and supporting that investment. Unless there's any other questions for Keith or anyone about other matters in the consent agenda, I'd ask for a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thank you. Be a second.
Second.
Thanks, Tony. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. Unless there's any other matters that come before us, that concludes the open portion of our meeting. As I said up front, we will adjourn to executive session. We'll only reconvene an open session to formally close and adjourn the meeting. So that brings to conclusion all intended presentations and discussion in open session. So if I could, I'd ask for a motion to conduct an executive session pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved.
Thanks, Michael. Could I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Dennis. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. We will now adjourn to executive session. Thank you very much. All right, with that, I'm pleased to bring us back into open session. If I could have a motion to do so.
So moved.
Thank you, Tony, B, Dennis. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're back in open session. As I indicated earlier, the business of the day has been otherwise completed and no votes were taken while we were in executive session. So unless there's any other matters to come before us, I'll remind everyone that our next scheduled meeting of the authority and canals is July 26th. And with that, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dennis. Second, B. Thank you very much. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Meeting's adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful holiday weekend or couple holiday weekends here with Memorial Day and 4th of July. Summer kicking off. Canals are open. The sun is shining. And look forward to the Yankees and Mets are playing well. So look forward to seeing everyone in a couple months. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Chairman.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.